Mars bars, Doritos, Coca-Cola. It's an unusual sound check, I'll give you that. But I like to live dangerously. My name is Hisham. I'm a psychiatrist and I study eating behavior. The sound check wasn't entirely irrelevant. Those three items, Mars bars, Doritos, Coca-Cola. Quick show of hands if you think that those could be potentially addictive. Okay, not too bad. Now this is mainly for the unbelievers amongst you then. When I started looking at food addiction, I was very interested because actually, there's a lot of food out there that's very unhealthy, chock full of fat and salt and sugar, and if it's addictive, then that's something potentially really dangerous and something we should do something about. But when I started looking into this, it emerged that a lot of the literature on food addiction came out of America. And for a while I actually thought that this might be some sort of right-wing agenda item. Because what I feared was that, the American right wing would take food addiction much like the way they'd taken drug addiction and contraception and abortion, and decide that the only way to actually go about addressing it, because it was wrong, it was immoral, was to be abstinent. And in truth, actually during the Bush era, the American drug policy, both domestically and internationally, was to be one of abstinence. So whether you were actually supporting foreign aid for drug addiction or HIV transmission, abstinence was the only way. And I began to think that actually, this did make sense, that if they actually declared that food addiction was a problem, abstinence was the only way, it would be a massive saving in the Medicare and the foreign aid budget. And I wouldn't put that past Karl Rove and Dick Cheney. But rather than tell you how naive that idea actually was, I'm going to read you an article from a magazine. Well, I'm not going to read you the whole article, don't worry, it's going to be in a slightly dry set. A little bit about an article from, not a scientific journal, but from a lay magazine, one that I'm sure most of you pick up every so often. This is from Forbes magazine. Those of you who haven't read it, they've got a great recipe and horoscope section at the back. A few magazines where you actually get gift coupons for Harrods. Okay, now this is an article from Forbes magazine, and the article is called "Desperate to Foment New Regulations and Lawsuits, Activists Ratchet Up Food Addiction Campaign." This is by a guy called Glenn Lammy. What I'm about to say subsequently may bias you against Glenn Lammy, so before I go any further, let me just say, whatever his faults may be, when it comes to getting titles for articles, the man has few equals. Several superiors, few equals. Glenn Lammy is a lawyer who's involved in creating legal papers, this is all his bio, involved in creating legal papers and managing communication devices, such as media briefings. And he works for an organization called the WLF. Now, WTF is the WLF, I hear myself ask. But, I couldn't entirely rely on the audience participation, so just to make sure that things progressed, I'm asking. The WLF, or the Washington Legal Foundation, is, and I'll give you their mission statement here, "We believe our fundamental freedoms must not be changed by the difficult times we live in. Our mission is to protect and defend the justice and democracy that define our American spirit. The WLF is more committed than ever to continuous advocacy for a sound free market economy, a reasonable legal system, competent and accountable government, and a strong national defense." You may be surprised to hear that their t-shirts and coffee mugs didn't sell very well. Now, just out of interest, if you'd read that in the Cambridge Council newsletter, you'd think, what nutters. But because I said the whole context is it being American, you all just accepted it. Glenn Lammy has written this article, and I'm just going to give you the opening line. "At a time when all attempts to impose sin taxes, more regulation of advertising and bans on certain products have been shut down, advocates of government intervention into America's food choices have ratcheted up their below-the-belt demonization campaign with food addiction. Now, that's not terribly sporting, is it? Because if you are going to have a demonization campaign, it's got to be above the belt. So I can see where some of his ire comes from. But actually, what got his goat, and you need a bit of background for this, was in New York, Mayor Bloomberg proposed that there should be a ban on large sugary drinks. He thought, quite unreasonably to many in the States, that it was not right that we sold soft drinks in 1 liter cans, containers, whatever those things are that they give you in the theatre. And this created a huge ruckus, and there was a lawsuit filed against him by the American Beverage Association and the American Theatre Goers Association. And they won. So in February, the law was knocked down. And Glenn Lammy was incensed because on a morning breakfast program in American television called Morning Joe, one of the co-hosts went on a red-faced rant about how sugar was poison and sodas were poison and we were just killing our children. Now I looked at the actual clip, and in a peculiar way, it is rather balanced actually. True, this co-host, Mira Brzezinski, does go on for a while about it being poison and sodas are killing our children, and you're getting addicted to this stuff. But her co-host provides an opposite view. In the background, while large glasses of soda are filling up, he says, "Oh, look at that! Oh, look at that! Oh, that looks great! Oh, I want one of those! Oh!" And he actually gets one of those given to him in the middle of the show. And so while his co-host is ranting, he's drinking a 1 liter soda. Now, we wouldn't think of that as balanced coverage in this country, but I don't think that it was enough there to actually get his ire. He also made a rather snide remark saying, ironically, Morning Joe is sponsored by Starbucks. Starbucks, whose Java Frappuccino comes in at 570 calories and has 87 grams of sugar. Right? A bit of an unfair sideswipe, I thought, of Starbucks, because they've been having a slightly difficult time having to sort of revise their business plan to keep account of tax. And they've also, I just realized recently, had to align it with their mission statement, which is to nurture the spirit. Now, whatever Glenn Lammy has to say about Starbucks, they can come up with a mission statement, unlike the WLF. Now, there is a bit more to this. In the States, there are lots of people who are filing lawsuits against various food and drink companies, to quote Glenn Lammy again, salivating at their fat profit margins and anticipating a big payout. And there have been people who've written various legal articles on why you can't do this, because you'll never be able to prove causation, and this is all going to fall flat. Nevertheless, there are a lot of people pursuing it. And the big food industry is understandably rather worried about the whole thing. So, let me give you another quote. Now, this is from a meeting organized by one of the executives at Pillsbury. We may not know them very well in this country, but one of their most famous products was the Doughboy monster from the first Ghostbusters movie. They also have a sideline in slightly smaller bakery products. Pillsbury convened this meeting and said, look, there's a lot of stuff in the foods that we make that, by the way, big meeting, Kraft, Nestle, all the big shots were there. They said, all the stuff that we're putting in foods is potentially harmful. We're going to be implicated in the causation of obesity in American children. We should do something about it. Stuff like food addiction is going to come and bite us pretty soon. And another man, who I think we must quote here, is somebody called Stephen Sanger, who works, he was CEO of General Mills, apparently a company that came up with Lunchables and various other disgusting snack items. And he said, he cut the whole meeting short by saying, don't talk to me about nutrition, talk to me about taste. And if this stuff tastes better, don't run around trying to sell stuff that doesn't taste good. To react to critics would jeopardize the sanctity of the recipes that made us so successful. And that ended the meeting. That was in 1999. What the meeting essentially focused on was what the companies would do about their stomach share. because that's apparently the term in the industry. You know, we've got all this food, and we've only got so much stomach share in the American market. Right? Okay, so Big Food isn't happy about food addiction. Right? They're very, very unhappy about food addiction, and they think that this is all just a whole lot of nonsense. Now, before I go on, just a quick straw poll again. All those of you who actually think that there's something to worry about food being addictive. Quick show of hands. Okay, so there are a few more of you there. Maybe I swung the argument a little in your favor, and in some ways it seems very clear. But you see, I didn't actually give you any facts. You know, these are all the bad guys, and it's very clear who the bad guys are here. And so some of you now probably feel I kind of tricked you. Because I never actually gave you. So, Hisham, you know, we weren't in possession of all the facts. You just told us all the stuff about people that we generally don't like very much. And we kind of thought, yeah, he's probably got a point. Okay. So I'll give you the facts. Point number one. If you put rats on junk food diets in cages, they will start binging, they will become obese, they will develop brain changes that look like addiction, and they will walk over electrified grids to get that food. Right. Okay, so I made a mistake there. I said point number one, and that probably gave you the impression that there was going to be a point number two. So, there isn't actually a point number two. Okay. That's as much as what we've got at the moment. And this puts us actually in a slightly difficult position. Right. Big food, big industry, and probably as you gathered from a little bit from the first few snippets, most of the right wing in America is probably very unhappy about food addiction. And if they're unhappy about food addiction, then there's probably something that we ought to be worried about. Right? The point I just wanted to make is that there probably is something we ought to worry about all these foods because they aren't terribly good. But they may not necessarily be addictive because we just don't know that they are or where they aren't. But it's a bit of a rush to actually go ahead and do things because we think that they might be addictive. It's still nevertheless a very confusing position because when you look out there, the bad guys are clear. There's Pizza the Hut. There's Kraft Vader. And there's the Dark Emperor Nestle maintaining his complexion in his bath of infant formula. Those are the bad guys. And if those are the bad guys, who are we? And I say, it's this time when we have to say to ourselves, these are not the biological models you are looking for. Thank you very much.